Okay, so before I open up Unreal Engine, I'd like to talk about editors. And before I talk about editors, I'd like to talk about actors and levels. And an actor is any object that can be placed into a level. An actor is a generic class that supports 3D transformations, such as translation, rotation, and scale. And of course, actors can be created or instantiated through gameplay code, so either C++ or blueprints. Now, a level is where you define the play space for your game by adding actors and gameplay logic. We place, transform, and edit the properties of actors in a level. Now, the Unreal Engine, often referred to as the Unreal Editor, contains multiple editors. It's focused on a workflow task or specialization, so it's almost like the Unreal Engine is composed of multiple programs, like one program composed of multiple programs. It almost feels like that when you work with the engine, and this allows you to again focus on a specific workflow task or specialization. So whether that is visual scripting, tweaking materials, or whatever the case might be, if you work like in that environment, then you are focused on that. And what's great about this is you don't have like 100 different tabs open at the same time. Each editor can be docked at the top, and then each editor has its own tabs and things that are associated with that particular editor, okay, as we'll see. Alright, so the level editor provides the core level creation functionality for Unreal Engine. Now this is where we create, view, and modify our levels. And when you open up the Unreal Engine, it will load the level editor by default. And that level editor will open up in like a tab, so that first tab that opens up will be the level editor. Other editors include the blueprint editor, material editor, and much more. Now in this lesson, we're not concerned with going over like all the different editors. That's not the point of this. You'll become more familiar with all of the editors like as we go along through the course. But primarily we are concerned for now with the level editor and the blueprint editor, for example, and we'll also look at various settings, so project settings and editor settings. So back in the engine here, you can see we have this one tab. So to the left here, you simply see the Unreal Engine logo, and then we have this first tab. So this is like Google Chrome. So here you can see Google Chrome. It has the single tab, and of course you can go and add more tabs, and you can click, if you click this one right here, then it's simply going to close that entire thing off, right? Now in this case with the editor, this tab, you cannot go and click that to close this tab. This is the level editor that opens up by default. If you want to close this off, then you have to click here to close, okay? Or of course you can go to file and exit and that kind of stuff. Okay, then here you can also see your project. You can see the version and all of that stuff right there if you hover over it, but this is the current project. Now as I mentioned, we have other editors as well, and so firstly I'll go to starter content. So right at the top here, again, previously we imported this vehicle variety pack. You might have other things in here. This is just one that I added to this current project. So starter content is what you add again when you create the project. So if you go under architecture, for example, you have a bunch of pieces to start off with. Okay, so under blueprints, I'll double click on that. And then let's say I'll drag and drop this blueprint fire effect into my world. And I can do that because that is an actor. If you hover over it, it says parent class, actor. And if it derives from actor, then that means we can drag and drop that into the world. I'll just delete that for now. I'll double click on this. Okay, so one thing to notice is that if you double click on various assets in the content browser down here, okay, this section down here is the content browser that opens up by default. So the content browser is the primary area where you'll be viewing your content, so your assets. You'll be organizing those assets, including whatever assets that you import into the engine. And you'll also be creating various assets, so you'll be creating blueprint classes and lots more. Now there's a lot to the content browser, so we'll probably have to do a lesson on that in the future. You can filter stuff, for example. You can drag and drop assets from a content browser into your scenes, as we've seen. And it has a lot of useful functionality for organizing your project. We've seen some of this already, so folders, for example, and a few more things as we'll see throughout the course. But for right now, I just want to show you that you have a bunch of assets and stuff, and that different assets. So in this case, this is also a blueprint. This is an actor, but it is also a blueprint. You can see it. If you hover over it again, between brackets, blueprint class. Okay, and these other things have the same, so it's blueprint class. And so when I want to edit the blueprint class itself, so the default, okay, then you double click on that and you can see it opens up an editor more or less like this. You have a bunch of options. We have a details panel right here. To the left you have components that we'll talk about in more detail. You can select them, and as you do, the details panel changes and updates. You have various things like variables and such. You have an event graph right here that, again, you can see it's blueprint, and we can write some logic in here using blueprint visual scripting. Okay, then you have construction script. Again, we'll talk about blueprints and stuff in more detail later. And then in the viewport, you get another 3D viewer, and we can view stuff in here and we can move it around. So if you select stuff, you can see the widgets show up. You can move and rotate stuff around and so forth. And so you can kind of edit this and then you can save that. But don't worry, we'll discuss blueprints in more detail later. I just wanted to briefly show you what this looks like. And the point is, this is a completely different editor, okay, than what you get with the level editor. And so you can close that off clicking this button. You also have something called level blueprints. You can open that right here. And again, that also opens up a blueprint editor. So let's close that off again. You have other things as well. So for example, go back and you have materials. Okay, you have a bunch of materials. Now if I double click on one of these, you can see I can dock that just like you can dock in Chrome or some other web browser. You can see you can dock this. Okay, you can actually move this around. So you want the level editor to the right here and stuff like that. For the most part, I leave the level editor to the left when I add the rest here to the right. But in any case, you can see that this now opens up a completely different editor now. So this is where you go and construct materials. So let's go back to that blueprints one again, and I'll open up that blueprint class again, blueprint effect fire. And so as you can see, the current asset that you are editing will show up in the header. So in the tab here, you can see a name. So the name of the class or material or whatever the thing is that you are currently editing will show up in the tab. So you can see minimal default. That is the actual level currently that we are editing. And here in this tab, we are editing this m_brick_clay_new. And here we are editing this blueprint_effect_fire. Okay. Now, of course, if I go and change, so I can go back again to content and go into one of these and maps, for example. Let's say starter map. So I'll open that map. I won't save this. And you can see that name in the tab changes now to starter map. And just as in Google Chrome, as I mentioned, you can close off these other tabs as well. I'll just load back to that minimal default level. Okay, so next we have the application menu bar. And if I click on file, for example, you can see we have nice groupings here. So we have groupings of the various options that you have. So load and save, for example, you can create a new level, open level, save, and all of that stuff. Then you can also go to project. So you don't have to close this down and open the launcher or something like that. You can just go new project, open project. You can create new C++ classes and stuff like that. Then you have favorites and so on. Okay, then you also have edit, of course, where you can do undo, redo, cut, copy, paste, and so on. Again, you can see you have these subsections. And here is where we have the editor preferences and the project settings. Now we'll discuss these in a bit more detail later. Then of course you have various windows that you can bring up and so on. And you have help, so you can access the documentation from right here. You have here viewport controls, might also be useful, tutorials, and you can access right here. You can go straight to the answer hub, the wiki, and various other things like that. I would like to note that you can also click, let's say you want help. Okay, I'll just expand this. And you, let's say, want help on something, you'll often see these question marks. You can just left click on that to go to the documentation. Now the most prominent view is probably this view right here, where you can click, okay, your scene view, where you can click and move stuff around, you drag and drop stuff in here and so on. To get from perspective to orthographic, what you'll do is you'll click on this drop down. So you can go from perspective, for example, to the top view, okay, front view and so forth. So that is how to do that. And you can also click on this button right here to get a quad layout, and you can move these sections around. Okay, click in the hover in the middle right there where those four meet. Left click right there where those like dividers meet, and you'll see my cursor changes in a kind of a quad arrow, and then I can left click and drag. Now I can change that around. I'll just left click on that to maximize that again. You can maximize whichever one it is that you want. Now we'll discuss various tips and tricks as we go along. I just want to briefly introduce this stuff to you. Right at the top here you have the toolbar, which includes like all your common tasks, so save, and you can do play. You have various options. You can click this drop down next to play, and you can play, so either simulate, play in the selected viewport, bring up a new editor window, and various other things that we'll discuss as we go along. And you have settings, so if you want to get to settings, you can go to world settings, project settings, you can go to the marketplace. The content browser will bring up the content browser down here. I'll close that off. Click on that and that will bring back the content browser. Now the details panel contains options or settings that relate to the current selection, so the particular instance in the viewport that you have selected. Now you can also select stuff in the world outliner, so either way that particular thing that you have selected, the details panel will populate with the settings or options basically that relate to that selected thing. So in other words, it's context sensitive to what you have selected. Now the world outliner displays all of the actors that populate the current scene in a hierarchical tree view. Now there's a lot of organizational tools that we have in the world outliner, and a bunch of functionality that we'll explain in another video. I just want to briefly introduce again some of these elements to you so you can start playing around, but we'll dive into a lot of the functionality as we go along. Okay, so next we have the modes tab, and this will change the behavior of the editor and depending on the task. So in the first tab here you can see we have the place mode and paint mode and so on. So you can see the shortcuts for this is Shift 1, Shift 2, Shift 3 to Shift 5. Okay, if you want those shortcuts, you can just hover over this and it will give you the shortcut. For the most part, I just click these buttons. Place simply means that we are dragging and dropping various actors into our world, into our level. So under basic, for example, you can drag and drop, let's say a cube or sphere, whatever the case might be, you can drag and drop those into the level. So left click on those and press delete. You also have lights, for example, so you can drag and drop lights in here, various volumes, and so on. You also have this recently placed section. So let's say you are setting up the lighting for your level. Of course, you'll be using lights quite often. So in that case, you can just go in here and look at like what you placed recently, because the lights will show up. And as soon as I click, let's say on the paint mode now, the menu will change and you now get various options here, brush options in here. So where the place mode contains default classes that can be placed or dragged and dropped into the level, such as lights or static mesh objects or the box trigger, for example. The paint mode is used for painting vertex color data on static mesh actors. Similarly, you have landscape, and as you can see, this will change in the viewport. You can see this weird kind of green grid now. And similarly, we also have different options that show up. You also have foliage. Okay, so the foliage mode is used for painting foliage actors, or basically instantiating foliage actors. So let's say you have a landscape and you want to instantiate trees or plants, on your landscape. You can go and place each one individually, but that's going to be very time consuming. So what you can do is you can change a few settings in this foliage mode, and then you can paint across your landscape and that will place your foliage for you. So again, this is something that I'll have to demonstrate to you at some point in the future. And we also have this geometry editing mode, where we can create or edit basic geometric shapes. Now we'll be discussing some of those as we go along. I just want to quickly introduce you to this tab so you can start playing around.